You don't belong here. Girls like you are the ones who work in this neighborhood. You don't live here. What happens when a man with a badge, drunk on his own petty power, tries to break a woman he has never met? He thought he was putting a criminal in her place after she had the nerve to move into his exclusive neighborhood. He had no idea. He had just laid hands on the daughter of the man who held his entire career, his freedom, and his future in the palm of his hand. The karma waiting for him is not only swift, it is as devastating as a Category 5 hurricane. Where are you watching this from? Your car? The office? Tell us in the comments. And if you believe arrogance deserves punishment, hit like and subscribe, because you will not want to miss a single second of the justice about to be delivered. The Gilded Market was never just a grocery store. It was a sanctuary nestled in the heart of the exclusive Crestwood Hills neighborhood. A temple built in honor of organic arugula, artisanal cheeses, and the unspoken agreement of social stratification. The air inside was cool and carried a faint scent of fresh eucalyptus from the flower section and premium sourdough bread. The floors were polished concrete, gleaming under recessed lighting that made the perfectly stacked pyramids of avocados look like clusters of green jewels. This was a place where shopping carts made no noise. They glided with a soft whisper. It was a place designed for comfort, for the effortless privilege of the 1%. And today it was a place that had quietly, collectively, decided that Amara Langston did not fit. She moved through the aisles with a confidence most people mistook for arrogance. She was radiant, a fact she neither flaunted nor hid. Tall and majestic, with curves the scarlet silk dress she wore did not conceal, but celebrated. She was a burst of vivid color in a world of muted beige and navy. Her skin was a deep mahogany, her hair a crown of intricate braids gathered high on her head. She had just closed on a beautiful Tudor-style home 3 blocks away, a milestone that felt both triumphant and, as she would soon discover, deeply isolating. This was not merely about buying groceries. She was trying to plant a flag in hostile territory. She felt the stares. They were not obvious at first. They were sideways glances from women in expensive athleisure, their faces tight with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. It was the way other shoppers steered their carts a little farther from hers, a subtle social distancing that had nothing to do with germs. She was an anomaly they could not classify. The dress was clearly expensive, the designer handbag unmistakable, her carriage undeniable. But she was black, and in the carefully curated world of Crestwood Hills, that was a variable their simple equation of wealth and worth could not solve. Amara kept her chin high as she placed a carton of oat milk and a cluster of organic red grapes into her basket. She was used to this. She had spent her life navigating spaces that had never been designed for her. She had learned to treat silent hostility as background noise, a static hum she had to ignore in order to survive. But sometimes the static grows too loud to ignore. The source was a man standing near the butcher counter, pretending to examine a steak. His name was Conrad Hargrove. He was an off-duty police officer, and the simmering resentment he carried seemed to strain the seams of his clothes. He was thick-set, with a ruddy face permanently flushed and hard, penetrating eyes that surveyed the world as if it were a lineup of suspects. I had lived in Crestwood Hills for years, an achievement secured by his wife's inheritance, not his police salary. He considered the neighborhood his castle. Its immaculate streets and soaring property values were proof of his supposed superiority. He had watched Amara move in the previous week. He had seen the movers, the expensive furniture, and he had seen her. A dark, ugly knot of prejudice had tightened in his gut. He watched her now, with a gaze that carried physical weight. He saw the red dress, the full lips, the confident sway of her hips. His mind, a swamp of bitter stereotypes, did not see a new neighbor. He saw an intruder, a prostitute, perhaps the girlfriend of some rapper. Something loud, temporary, and unwanted. Something that would disturb the harmony of his pristine world. A surge of protective rage rose in him. It was his duty, as a resident and as an officer of the law, to protect the peace of his community. He set the stake down and moved to intercept her as she turned the corner into the wine aisle. He positioned his cart to block her path, a deliberately aggressive maneuver. Amara stopped, polite smile already prepared. "Excuse me," she said, voice soft and even. Conrad did not move his cart. He let his eyes travel the length of her body, from braid to heel, in a slow, dismissive, insulting sweep. He smirked. "You lost?" His voice was a low, gravelly growl. Amara's smile did not fade, but a chill slid down her spine. She recognized the script. "No, I'm quite certain I know where I am. Could you move your cart, please?" He gave a short, unpleasant chuckle. "I don't think you do. This is a pretty exclusive market, you know, for residents." He leaned on his cart, making himself an even larger obstacle. "Maybe you're looking for the liquor store on Jefferson Avenue. That would suit you better." The insult landed as sharply and clearly as a slap. Jefferson Avenue was miles away, in a far humbler neighborhood. The calm Amara had forged over years began to crack. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. "I live on Oak Street," she said, voice turning icy. "Now for the third time, move your cart." His smile widened, eyes glittering with malice. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying the flash of anger he saw in her eyes. He had the control. "Sure," he sneered, exaggerating his disbelief. "Of course you do, sweetheart. You know we have a real problem with people coming in here pretending to be someone they're not." He leaned closer, dropping his voice into a conspiratorial mockery. "You don't belong here. Girls like you are the ones who work this neighborhood. You don't live here." The words hung in the cold, sterile air of the wine aisle, as obscene and out of place as graffiti on a marble statue. "Girls like you work this neighborhood." It was not merely an insult. It was a brand, an attempt to burn a label into her skin. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The rows of expensive Merlot and Chardonnay blurred into an insignificant background. There was only this man, his face a mask of arrogant intolerance, and the ugly space he had forced between them. Amara's first instinct was a flash of pure fury. She wanted to scream, to unleash a tirade that would wipe the self-satisfaction from his face. She wanted to shove his cart so hard he would stumble backward into a display of expensive olive oil. But she did not. Years of her father's advice echoed in her mind. Never let them see you lose control. The moment you do, they have already won. Stay calm. Be the smartest person in the room. She straightened, radiating a regal defiance that only seemed to enrage him further. "My personal life, like my address, is none of your business," she said, voice dangerously low. "You are harassing me. I am going to ask you one last time to get out of my way before I call the store manager and have you removed." The word harassing was a match tossed into a pool of gasoline. Conrad Hargrove was a police officer. I was the one who handled harassment cases. He was the authority. For this woman, this reacher, to throw that term in his face was an intolerable challenge to his entire worldview. His already flushed face turned a deep purple. "You're going to have me thrown out?" he growled, stepping forward and invading her personal space. He smelled of stale coffee and hypocrisy. "You walk in here, dressed like you're straight off the street, and think you have the right to demand things. You're all the same. Nothing but talk. No respect for authority. Other shoppers had stopped. Their curiosity sharpened. A woman with pearls clutched her purse tighter. A man in a polo shirt pretended to study a wine label while watching the drama. No one intervened. They were spectators in a coliseum, waiting to see how the lion would deal with the intruder. Amara stood her ground. "You have no authority here," she said, gaze locked on his. "You're a bully and a bigot, and frankly, you're pathetic." That word destroyed him. Pathetic sliced through his fragile ego, the carefully constructed facade of superiority built over a disappointing life. He was not a detective. I was not a hero. He was a neighborhood officer, growing older and more bitter. And this woman, with her beauty, her confidence, and her refusal to be intimidated, was a mirror reflecting every failure he had ever known. His training, his oath, his sense of civic duty. Everything vanished in a cloud of pure, cool, uncontrolled rage. He saw a target. He acted the way he always acted when he felt control slipping away. He used force. The movement was shockingly fast and brutal. He raised his open right hand and, with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent aisle, slapped Amara across the face. The force of the blow snapped her head to the side. Her cheek exploded in a flash of pain. Her ears rang. The gasp from the woman with pearls was sharp and audible. The world went silent, except for the high-pitched buzz in her ears. For an instant, she was simply a woman who had been struck. The public humiliation cut deeper than the physical pain. She felt the heat rising in her cheek, the clear imprint of his violence taking the shape of his palm. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head to look at him. Her eyes, which moments earlier had burned with cold anger, were now something else entirely. They were empty, dark, icy calm, and completely devoid of fear. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stared at him. Conrad Hargrove felt a sudden, unexpected chill of fear. He had expected tears, hysteria, a satisfying collapse. He had not expected this terrifying Arctic silence. He watched the perfect red handprint blooming across her brown skin. He had gone too far. He knew, but his arrogance would not allow him to retreat. "That's what you get for running your mouth," he spat, trying to regain his balance. His voice was a little too loud, a little unsteady. "You should have just left." Hai gave her one last look of contempt, a look he hoped conveyed victory, then grabbed his cart and pushed past her, leaving her alone in the aisle. The other shoppers, after their brief moment of drama, quickly scattered, unwilling to become involved. No one asked if she was all right. No one offered help. She was alone, abandoned, humiliated. She stood there for a long time, the pulse in her cheek beating like a steady drum. He believed he had won. He believed he had put her in her place. He had no idea. He had just signed his own death warrant. He had no idea of the hell he had just unleashed. For a full minute, Amara did not move. She remained a crimson statue of silence among an aisle of quiet glass bottles. The sharp pain in her cheek was a physical anchor, holding her to the raw, visceral humiliation of the moment. It was a violation so deep, so brazen, that it felt surreal. To be struck in public under the bright, sterile lights of a place like this by a man who had appointed himself guardian of its gates. It was a nightmare scene. Shock gave way to a wave of pure, uncontrolled fury, a heat that began in her chest and radiated outward, a flare of rage that threatened to consume her. She wanted to smash every bottle of wine in the aisle. She wanted to follow him into the parking lot and return the violence he had so casually given her. She wanted to tear his world apart. The rage was a tsunami, and for a few precious seconds, she let herself be carried by it. She allowed herself to feel its full, volcanic force. It was the culmination of 1,000 small wounds, 1,000 sidelong glances, 1,000 whispers about her place that she had endured her entire life. This was different. This was not a cut. This was a stab. And then, as quickly as it had come, the heat began to recede. It did not disappear. Instead, it underwent a terrifying alchemy. The boiling fury cooled, compressed, and hardened into something far more dangerous: determination. A determination as cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of ice. Amara Langston had not built a successful career as a high-level marketing consultant by being ruled by emotion. She had done it by being relentlessly strategic, seeing the entire board while her opponents were still focused on the first move. The bully in the wine aisle believed he had won the game. In reality, he had just made his first and final fatal mistake. Her vision cleared. Conrad Hargrove's smug face was burned into her memory. But she no longer saw a man. She saw a target, a problem that needed to be systematically dismantled with chilling, newly discovered calm. She left her basket where it stood. The organic grapes and oat milk no longer mattered. She walked not with the hurried steps of a victim fleeing a scene, but with the measured, deliberate gait of a predator. Head high, back straight. She ignored the few curious glances that followed her. Let them look. They were irrelevant. She stepped out of the Golden Market. The automatic doors whispered open, and she walked into the warm sunlight. The brightness made her eyes water, and the sharp pain in her cheek intensified. She found a quiet bench in a carefully tended courtyard between the market and a boutique, a small oasis of calm amid the opulence. She sat. The scarlet silk of her dress stood in vivid contrast against the gray stone. She took out her personal phone with smooth, precise movements. Her hands were perfectly steady. She did not call 911. Calling the local police to report one of their own officers felt like a waste of time, a recipe for dismissal and further humiliation. She needed to go over their heads. She needed to reach the very top of the hierarchy. She scrolled through her contacts until she found one labeled with a simple, powerful name. Dad. She pressed the call button. It rang twice before he answered. Amara, sweetheart. Everything all right? His voice was warm, the familiar baritone of her father, Elias Langston, a voice that had always meant safety and strength. Amara drew a deep breath, keeping her voice completely monotone, stripping it of any tremor, any trace of the hell burning inside her. Dad, I'm fine, but something happened. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Elias Langston knew his daughter's voice better than anyone. He recognized her "I'm fine" tones. This was not one of them. This was her crisis voice, quiet, controlled, and absolutely serious. Where are you? He asked, instantly shifting from paternal affection to professional gravity. I'm at the Gilded Market on Oak Street in Crestwood Hills. What happened? An off-duty police officer assaulted me, she said. The words came out as a simple statement, as if she were reading from a report. We had an argument. He called me a prostitute, and then he hit me in the face. Seamless silence. For several long seconds, the only sound on the line was a faint static hum. It was the sound of a father's love colliding with the fury of a police chief. It was the sound of a universe rearranging itself. Finally, she heard his voice, and it was a new sound, one she had heard only a handful of times in her life. A voice rough with contained rage. It was the voice of a man who commanded thousands of officers, a man who moved with skill through the treacherous politics of a major American city. It was the voice of pure, cold power. Give me his name. Conrad Hargrove, Amara said, with photographic memory. He didn't identify himself as an officer, but I heard someone else whisper it after he left. He's white, stocky build, reddish blonde hair. Stay where you are, her father ordered. Don't speak to anyone. Don't move. I'm handling this. A car will be there to pick you up shortly. Not a patrol car, a private vehicle. It will take you home. Lock the doors. I'll see you tonight. Dad, she began. I'm handling it, Amara, he repeated. And in those 4 words, she heard the promise of a reckoning. It was not the promise of a father who would simply comfort her. It was the promise of a police chief who would bring the full weight of the law down on the man who had dared to touch his daughter. The call ended. Amara lowered the phone, staring at nothing. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen and could see the faint swelling on her cheek. Conrad Hargrove had tried to humiliate her, reduce her to a stereotype, and put her in her place. He had no idea he had just provoked a king, and he was about to discover it in the most brutal way imaginable. What happens when you attack a princess in her father's kingdom? Police Chief Elias Langston hung up and sat motionless for a moment. He was behind his large mahogany desk on the top floor of police headquarters. The sprawling city stretched out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. The office was a testament to his authority. Flags, decorations, the city seal. But in that instant, he was not a chief. He was a father, and a primal volcanic fury was coursing through his veins. He pictured his daughter, his brilliant, beautiful Amara, alone after the assault. He pictured the satisfied face of the man who had struck her. The impulse to take his service weapon, drive to Crestwood Hills, and drag Conrad Hargrove out of his house by force was so intense it became a physical pressure. He gripped the arms of his leather chair until his knuckles went white and the leather creaked in protest. But Elias Langston had not risen to the top of his profession by allowing anger to dictate his actions. He was a man who had spent his life fighting on 2 fronts, crime on the streets and the deeply entrenched racism within the very departments he served. He was a master strategist, a natural politician who understood that true power did not lie in brute force, but in the precise, surgical application of the system. To let his rage surface would be a mistake. To act as a vengeful father would only hand ammunition to his enemies. He had to be the chief, cold, methodical, unstoppable. He drew a deep, shuddering breath, imprisoning the beast of his anger. Then he exhaled slowly, the fury solidifying, just as it had in his daughter, into unbreakable resolve. He would not merely punish Conrad Hargrove. He would annihilate him. He would use the man's arrogance, his intolerance, and the very system he had sworn to uphold to destroy his life completely. His hand moved to the intercom on his desk. His movements were now precise and decisive. "Sharon," he said, voice low and dangerously calm. "Get Captain Sienna Vargas from Internal Affairs to my office immediately, and get the commander of Precinct 12 on video conference in 5 minutes. Clear my schedule for the rest of the day." "Yes, Chief," his assistant replied, recognizing the alert signal. While he waited, he typed furiously. He pulled the personnel file of every officer named Conrad Hargrove in the department. There were 2. He cross-referenced them with property records in the Crestwood Hills area. Bingo. Officer Conrad Hargrove. Badge number 734. Assigned to Precinct 12. A long service record with few commendations and multiple notations for minor infractions. 2 civilian complaints for excessive force, both dismissed for lack of evidence. A note from a previous sergeant mentioning an attitude problem. The man was a cancer, a latent infection the department had allowed to fester for years. The door opened, and Captain Sienna Vargas entered. She was a sharp, pragmatic woman with an intelligent gaze that missed nothing. She was one of the first people Elias had promoted, a woman he trusted completely to root out corruption within his own ranks. "Chief," she said, closing the door behind her. Elias wasted no time on formalities. "We have an officer-involved incident. An off-duty assault against a civilian in Crestwood Hills a short while ago. The officer is Conrad Hargrove from Precinct 12. Vargas's expression hardened. "Is the victim willing to file a complaint?" "The victim is my daughter," Elias said. The words landed in the silent room like stones. Vargas's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. She understood immediately. This was not a simple case. This was a declaration of war. "Understood, Chief. What do you need?" "First, I want you to send 2 of your best detectives, the most discreet, to the luxury market on Oak Street. I want every security camera recording from inside and outside the store, specifically the wine aisle and the parking lot for the last hour. Follow protocol to the letter. Get a warrant if necessary, though I doubt the manager will refuse. Second, I want a complete file on Officer Hargrove. Every complaint, every partner, every evaluation. I want to know who he drinks with, who he plays cards with. I want every secret he has before nightfall. Third, I've already sent a private car to take my daughter home. I want one of your detectives there within the hour to take her statement, photograph her injuries, and treat her like the daughter of a senator, because today, that is exactly what she is." "And Hargrove?" Vargas asked. A cold, predatory smile touched Elias's lips for the first time. "Hargrove is mine. I'm about to speak with his commander. He will be ordered to report to Precinct 12. They'll tell him it's for a special assignment, something to stroke his pathetic ego. He'll walk in there, full of confidence and pride. And you and I, Captain, will be waiting for him in Interrogation Room 3. He looked Vargas in the eyes. "He used his power to harm my family. I will use mine to end his career. And this is only the beginning." The desk intercom buzzed. The face of the Precinct 12 commander, a weary-looking man named Captain Owen Drake, appeared on the screen. "Chief Langston," Drake said, surprised by the unexpected call. "Drake," Elias began, voice soft as silk, perfectly concealing his fury. "I've been reviewing community engagement initiatives. I have a special project in mind for the Crestwood Hills area, and I need an officer who knows the neighborhood. I see you have an officer, Conrad Hargrove, a longtime resident. I'd like to speak with him. Could you have him report to the precinct in about 90 minutes? Tell him it's about a possible position near an airstrip, a real opportunity for him." Captain Drake, completely unaware, smiled brightly. "Of course, Chief. Hargrove is a solid officer, if a bit rough around the edges. He'll be thrilled. I'll call him at home right away." "Thank you, Captain," Elias said, and ended the call. The trap was set. The bait was laid, and the arrogant, stupid wolf was about to walk straight into it. Conrad Hargrove felt euphoric. He had left the luxury market with a renewed sense of purpose, chest swelling with the fleeting satisfaction of victory. He had put that woman in her place. He had defended the invisible but sacred boundary of his neighborhood. He drove home with the windows of his massive pickup truck rolled down. Blasting classic rock, he felt like a conqueror returning from a victorious skirmish. He imagined telling the story to his colleagues at the precinct, embellishing the details, casting himself as the hero who stood against the rising tide of undesirables. He was the shepherd dog protecting the flock. When he arrived home, his wife Lila was in the kitchen. She was a thin, an anxious woman who had long ago learned that her husband's moods were unpredictable weather systems to be approached with caution. "How was the store?" she asked, without looking up from the salad she was chopping. "Fine," he grunted, dropping his keys on the granite counter. Had to deal with some trash, but I handled it. Lila flinched at his tone, but said nothing. Handled it. That used to be a polite way of saying there would be a confrontation that later ended in a complaint, or worse, a lawsuit. She lived in a constant state of quiet dread. Conrad opened a beer and sat at the kitchen island. Feeling magnanimous, he had restored order to his universe. It was in that state of self-satisfaction that his phone rang. He saw the caller ID, Captain Drake. He straightened, adopting his official police expression. "Hargrove," he answered. "Conrad, it's Drake. Where are you?" "Just got home, Captain." "What's up?" "I think I've got good news. I just got a call from upstairs. From Chief Langston himself." Conrad felt an electric jolt. The chief had never spoken to him before. Elias Langston was a legend, a relentless reformer hired to clean up the department. In Conrad's judgment, he was also part of the problem. An affirmative action appointment more interested in politics than real police work. Still, a call from the chief was significant. "I wants to see you," Drake continued, voice full of the pride Conrad eagerly absorbed. "He's launching a new community engagement initiative in Crestwood. He asked for you specifically. Said he needed a veteran officer who knows the neighborhood. This is big, Conrad. A real chance to get off patrol, maybe even make detective." The news hit Conrad like a shot of pure adrenaline. It was everything he had been waiting for. Recognition, respect, validation of his long, unappreciated years on the force. Of course, the chief would want him. Who else knew better than he did the kind of people trying to infiltrate the neighborhood? Who else had the guts to do what needed to be done? His little confrontation in the grocery store now felt prophetic, a demonstration of his proactive policing. "Wow," Conrad said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Okay, when does he want to see me?" 90 minutes from now at the precinct. Don't be late. And Conrad, shine your shoes. This is your shot. Don't blow it." "Wouldn't dream of it, Cap," Conrad said with a wide, triumphant smile. He hung up and slammed the beer down on the counter. "Yes!" he roared. Lila jumped, dropping a tomato onto the floor. "What is it?" she asked in a trembling voice. "That was the captain. The chief wants to see me. Talking about a promotion, a plainclothes job. I told you," he said, pointing a thick finger at her. "I told you my time was coming. After all these years dealing with the riffraff, it's finally paying off." I was a whirlwind of energy. He charged upstairs, stripping off his civilian clothes. He put on his most decorated uniform, the one he saved for official ceremonies. He spent 10 minutes polishing his shoes until he could see his own reflection. Full of satisfaction, he looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his tie. He saw a hero, a protector, a man on the rise. I was completely blind to the fact that he was dressing for his own execution. The drive to Precinct 12 was the best of his life. He felt powerful, important. Every red light felt like a brief pause for the world to admire him. He imagined the meeting. The chief, a stern but fair man, would recognize a fellow warrior. He would shake Conrad's hand firmly and congratulate him on his dedication. They would talk about the importance of keeping neighborhoods like Crestwood safe. Conrad rehearsed his lines, how he would speak about the importance of being proactive and maintaining community standards. He parked in his usual spot at the precinct, the same one he had used for years. But today it felt different. It felt like a launching pad. He walked into the building with confident, arrogant strides. The desk sergeant, a veteran officer named Allie, nodded. "Hargrove, the captain's waiting for you. Said to take you to Interrogation Room 3. Conrad paused. Interrogation Room 3 was an odd place for a meeting. It was a cold, windowless box used for questioning suspects. "Room 3? He asked. "You sure?" "That's what the captain said." Ali replied with a shrug. Said the chief wanted a private, secure place to talk. Guess he doesn't want distractions. It made a certain sense. High-level business. Conrad's ego supplied the justification without hesitation. He nodded, recovering his confidence. Right. He walked down the long linoleum hallway, the sound of his polished shoes echoing in the silence. He passed holding cells and evidence lockers. The air smelled of disinfectant and despair. He reached the door of interrogation room 3, took a deep breath, smoothed his uniform, and prepared to face his future. He opened the door with a confident smile and stepped inside. In that instant, then his world collapsed. The room was not what he expected. It was cold, sterile, and silent. The tension was palpable, almost thick enough to touch. There was no sign of the friendly Captain Drake waiting with a handshake. There was no festive atmosphere. 3 people sat at the austere metal table under the harsh light of a single fluorescent fixture. In the center was Police Chief Elias Langston. He was not smiling. His face was a mask of cold, contained fury, his eyes like shards of obsidian. To his right sat Captain Sienna Vargas of Internal Affairs, expression grim, a thick file open in front of her. To his left sat a severe-looking man in a suit whom Conrad vaguely recognized as a prosecutor from the district attorney's office. Conrad's smile froze on his face, then faded, replaced by a wave of confusion and dread. A cold knot formed in his stomach. This was not a congratulation. This was an ambush. "Officer Hargrove," Chief Langston said, voice soft, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. It was more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." He gestured to the single empty metal chair bolted to the floor on the other side of the table. Conrad's legs felt like lead. He shuffled forward, his arrogance gone, replaced by the hesitant gait of a condemned man. He sat. The cold metal pressed through his pressed uniform trousers. He looked from the chief to Vargas to the prosecutor. His mind raced, trying to understand the scene. What had he done? Was this about one of the old excessive force complaints? An illegal stop? His brain frantically reviewed years of shortcuts and questionable actions. "Chief, I don't understand," he stammered. "Captain Drake said—" "Captain Drake told you exactly what I ordered him to tell you," Langston interrupted, voice sharp as broken glass. "We are here to discuss a matter of community engagement. Specifically, your interaction with a member of the Crestwood Hills community a short while ago at the Gilded Market." Conrad Hargrove went pale. His heart hammered against his chest. The woman in the red dress. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead. How? How could they know? "It was nothing, sir," he said, falling back on training. The instinct to deny, deflect, and control the narrative. A misunderstanding. There was a woman causing a disturbance, acting suspiciously. I spoke with her. She became aggressive, so I de-escalated and left. Store security can confirm it. Chief Langston raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "Let me stop you right there, officer, before you commit perjury and add another charge to your record." He nodded toward Captain Vargas. "Captain, if you would." Vargas did not look at Conrad. She looked at the large television monitor mounted on the wall. She pressed a button on the remote. The screen lit up. The image was sharp. High definition. It was the wine section of the luxury market. And there he was. There was the woman in the red dress. There was no sound, but none was needed. The silent film was damning. The footage showed him blocking her path. It showed his aggressive posture, his mocking face leaning toward hers. It showed her calm, defiant stance. And then, with brutal, undeniable clarity, it showed his hand rising and striking her across the face. The video played in slow motion, his violent act repeating for him like a recurring nightmare. Conrad stared at the screen, mouth open. A small, choked sound escaped his throat. It was irrefutable. Everything was there. The store manager was more than happy to cooperate once he learned the chief of police was interested, Vargas said dryly, switching off the video. The screen went black, but the image remained burned into Conrad's retinas. Now, Chief Langston said, leaning forward and dropping his voice to a low, threatening growl. Would you like to revise your statement about the misunderstanding in which you successfully de-escalated the situation? Conrad's world was crumbling. His mind spun desperately, searching for any possible lifeline. She provoked me, he stammered, voice cracking. She was disrespectful. She called me pathetic. Didn't you hear what she said? Oh, we heard, the chief said, eyes glittering with cold triumph. He reached forward and placed a small, elegant digital audio recorder on the table. He pressed play. Amara's voice filled the quiet room, clear and steady. My personal life, like my address, is none of your business. You are harassing me. And then his own voice, growling and ugly, said, You walk in here dressed like a streetwalker and think you can demand things. You're all the same. He flinched as if struck. He could hear his own intolerance, his own hatred, played back to him. The audio continued. Every word was another nail in his coffin. Amara's voice. You're a bully, a bigot, and frankly, you're pathetic. And then his own. That's what you get for running your mouth. The chief pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Conrad's ragged, panicked breathing. He stared at the chief with eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Everything was falling into place. The speed of the investigation, the chief's personal involvement, the high-quality audio. There was only one explanation. That woman, he whispered. Who is she? Chief Elias Langston leaned back in his chair. He looked at the defeated, sweating man in the uniform he had completely dishonored. He let him hang in that terrifying silence for a long, agonizing moment. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. Her name is Amara Langston, the chief said, voice flat and devoid of all emotion. And she is my daughter. The last traces of color drained from Conrad Hargrove's face. He made a choked sound, a gasp, like a man who had just been stabbed through the heart. It was not only his career that was over. In that shattering moment of clarity, he understood that his entire life was finished. The name, Langston, and the words, my daughter, echoed in the small, sterile room like a death knell for Conrad Hargrove. It was as if the floor had opened beneath his feet, plunging him into a bottomless abyss of his own making. He had assaulted the daughter of the most powerful law enforcement figure in the city. The absolute, catastrophic stupidity of his actions overwhelmed him. A wave of cold, nauseating panic. All the arrogance, all the prejudice, all the self-righteous fury that had driven him for the past hours collapsed into a pathetic heap of pure terror. He began to babble, words pouring from his mouth in a desperate, incoherent torrent. Chief, sir, I had no idea. I swear to God, if I had known, please, it was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was having a bad day. My temper. I'm so sorry, sir. Please. He looked at Elias Langston, with eyes begging for a mercy he knew he did not deserve. He was searching for a fellow officer, a member of the Brotherhood, who might understand a lapse in judgment. But the man staring back at him was not a police officer. He was a father whose child had been brutally assaulted, and his face was stone. A bad day, Elias repeated, voice dripping with contempt. You used your size and your supposed authority to physically assault a woman because you didn't like the color of her skin or the dress she was wearing. That is not a bad day, Hargrove. That is a hate crime. He pointed to the prosecutor. Mr. Crow from the district attorney's office agrees. You will be charged with third-degree assault. But that is only the beginning. Elias's gaze hardened. My office has also contacted the U.S. Attorney. We will formally request that a federal investigation be opened against you for violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Even though you were off duty, you invoked your authority, your belief that you had the right to control that space, in order to deprive a citizen of her civil rights. That carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. Prison, the word stole the last of Conrad's breath. He had spent his career putting men behind bars. The idea of being on the other side of those bars, a disgraced former officer among a population that despised him, was a vision of hell. "Please," he sobbed, tears now streaming freely down his face, leaving hot tracks through the sweat. "My wife, my mortgage, my pension. Don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I'll resign." "Oh, you will resign," Chief Langston said, with chilling finality. "Effective immediately. But that is not a deal. It is a formality." He nodded toward the door. "This meeting is over." As if on cue, the door to the interrogation room opened. 2 large uniformed patrol officers entered. They were young, faces impassive, but their eyes reflected a clear and open contempt for the man crying at the table. Behind them stood Captain Owen Drake, his face pale and ashen. He was clearly fully aware of the situation now, and the look he gave Conrad was pure betrayal and disgust. "Officer Hargrove," Chief Langston ordered in a voice of absolute authority. "Stand up." Conrad, dazed and trembling, rose to his feet. "Captain Drake," the chief continued, "this man has dishonored his uniform, this precinct, and the entire department. I want his badge, now." Captain Drake stepped forward, expression grim. "Conrad," he said, voice rough with emotion, "give it to me." With shaking hands, Conrad fumbled for the badge, pinned to his chest. It was the symbol of his identity, his power, the very essence of what he had been for years. His fingers felt clumsy, foreign. Finally, he unpinned it. He felt its weight in his palm, a weight that had once filled him with pride, now as heavy as a stone, dragging him under. He held it out to his captain. Drake took it without touching Conrad's hand, as if it were contaminated. "His credentials and his service weapon," the chief ordered. One of the uniformed officers stepped forward and, with professional detachment, unclipped the holster from Conrad's belt and removed the wallet containing his police identification. In less than 30 seconds, Conrad Hargrove was stripped of every symbol of power. He was no longer a police officer. He was simply a man in a uniform, a terrified, broken civilian standing in an interrogation room of a police station. "Cuff him," the chief ordered. The click of the handcuffs locking around Conrad's wrists was the loudest sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of the end of his old life and the beginning of the new, the life of a criminal, an inmate, an outcast. The officers took him by the elbows and turned him toward the door. He cast one last desperate look at the chief. "Langston, please." Elias Langston stood and walked around the table until he stood face to face with Conrad. He looked directly into the eyes of the man who had struck his daughter. "You tried to take my daughter's dignity," he said, voice low and fierce. "You tried to make her feel small and worthless. So for the rest of your miserable life, while you sit in your cell, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember me. I want you to understand that you did not mess with just anyone. You messed with the system itself, and the system always wins." The officers led him out of the room. On the chief's orders, they did not take him out the back door. They walked him through the main squad room, past the desks of the men and women he had worked with for years. The room fell silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and watched as Officer Conrad Hargrove, the loud-mouthed bully of the patrol division, was led through the precinct in handcuffs a man completely disgraced. The humiliation was total. It was a professional execution carried out in front of his peers. It was perfect karmic justice. He had tried to publicly humiliate a woman he considered inferior. In return, his own identity was destroyed publicly and irrevocably. The arrest of Officer Conrad Hargrove sent shockwaves through the entire police department. It was not simply that an officer had been arrested for assault. Tragically, that was not unheard of. What was unprecedented was the speed, the severity, and the source of the response. It sent a clear and terrifying message to every officer. The chief's own daughter. An off-duty incident. Federal civil rights charges within hours. This was not justice as usual. This was a declaration of intent. The old habit of covering for problems and protecting even the most corrupt was over. But for Chief Elias Langston, the arrest of Conrad Hargrove was not the end of the war. It was merely the first decisive battle. Hargrove was not just a corrupt officer. He was a symptom of a deeper disease, a cultural decay. Elias had spent his career trying to root out. He knew that for every Conrad Hargrove stupid enough to be caught on camera, there were a dozen more who were smarter, more discreet, and equally toxic, poisoning the department from within. I would use the Hargrove case not as an instrument of personal revenge, but as a tool for reform. The morning after the arrest, Ellis held a press conference. The room was packed with reporters, the atmosphere thick with speculation. They expected evasive denials, the usual bureaucratic stonewalling. Elias gave them the opposite. He walked to the podium with a serious, resolute expression and laid out the facts. Yesterday, one of my officers, Conrad Hargrove, was arrested and charged with assault, he began, voice resonating through the speakers. The victim of this unprovoked and despicable attack was a civilian woman. As it happens, she is also my daughter. A wave of gasps and frantic typing swept the room. Let me be clear. Officer Hargrove's actions were a betrayal of his oath, a dishonor to his chair, and an affront to the values of this department and the citizens we are sworn to protect. He will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But this incident, as painful as it is for my family, is not simply about the criminal behavior of one man. It is about the culture that allowed a man like him, a man with a documented history of complaints and an attitude problem, to continue wearing this uniform. It is a failure of supervision, a failure of accountability, and a failure of the system itself. And that failure ends now. It was a stunning admission, a public act of self-criticism unprecedented from a police chief. He was not merely abandoning a fallen officer to his fate. He was putting his entire department on notice. Effective immediately, he announced, I am ordering a comprehensive independent audit of Precinct 12. Every civilian complaint from the past several years will be reopened and reinvestigated by a team external to the department. I have requested that the Department of Justice send observers. We will thoroughly examine use of force reports, traffic stop data, and internal performance evaluations. We are going to shine a light into every dark corner of that precinct, and we are going to eradicate the infection. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic for the command of Precinct 12. Captain Owen Drake, who had praised Hargrove as a solid officer, was immediately relieved of command and reassigned to an administrative post in the evidence warehouse, a classic form of bureaucratic exile. The internal audit, as Elias had predicted, was a disaster. It uncovered a deeply entrenched pattern of misconduct that supervisors had lightly ignored because they valued loyalty of integrity. The investigation revealed that Conrad Hargrove had been the leader of a small, toxic clique of officers who called themselves the Yard Dogs. They had a history of harassing minority residents, conducting illegal searches, and filing false reports to cover their actions. 2 other officers were terminated. A sergeant who had systematically buried complaints against Hargrove and his crew was forced into early retirement and lost his pension. The thin blue line had been broken, and the corruption it had protected was finally exposed to daylight. Elias did not stop there. He seized the momentum of the scandal to push through comprehensive department-wide reforms he had been planning for months. He implemented a new mandatory training program in de-escalation techniques and implicit bias, designed by outside experts rather than the usual outdated PowerPoint presentations. He overhauled the early warning system for identifying problem officers, making it easier for citizens to file complaints and harder for supervisors to ignore them. He launched a series of neighborhood meetings across the city, forcing his command staff to stand before the public and answer hard questions. The police union's resistance was fierce. They called him a traitor, a politician sacrificing his own officers for positive publicity. But Elias held firm. He had the political backing, the moral high ground, and the most powerful weapon of all, the undeniable video of one of his officers brutally assaulting an innocent woman. He had transformed a personal crisis into a professional crusade. The relentless karma that had destroyed Conrad Hargrove was now spreading. A purifying fire that threatened to burn away the old corrupt structures and, with luck, allow something better to rise from the ashes. While Chief Langston waged his battle against the systemic failures of his department, the legal system ground forward at full speed, bringing its full weight down on the disgraced Conrad Hargrove. His case was fast-tracked. The evidence was so overwhelming, so viscerally damning, that his public defender knew a trial was unwinnable. The high-definition video, the clear audio, the testimony of store staff, and the incriminating photographs of Amara's bruised cheek formed a clear and airtight case. The U.S. Attorney's Office, sensing a high-profile civil rights victory, pursued the federal charges with relentless zeal. Facing the possibility of a decade or more in federal prison, Conrad Hargrove did the only thing he could. He accepted a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to the state charge of assault and the federal charge of deprivation of rights under color of law. He threw himself on the mercy of the court, a court that had very little mercy to offer. The sentencing hearing was a media spectacle. Conrad Hargrove, stripped of his uniform and wearing a poorly fitting suit, stood before the judge, a shadow of the arrogant man he had once been. He was pale and had lost a great deal of weight. He offered a broken, tearful apology, speaking of his remorse, his family, and the worst mistake of his life. Amara was in the courtroom, seated in the front row with her father. She had refused to let the incident define her as a victim. She had given her statement, testified before the grand jury, and now she was there to witness the conclusion. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, her expression serene and composed. When Hargrove spoke of his mistake, her gaze did not waver. She knew it had not been a mistake. A mistake is an accident. His actions had been a choice, a conscious act of malice born of a lifetime of cultivated intolerance. The judge, a stern, pragmatic woman who had seen countless men like Hargrove in her courtroom, remained unmoved by his tears. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room, "you did not merely strike a woman. You attacked the very trust of the community. You used the authority granted to you by the people, even while off duty, as a weapon of prejudice and intimidation. You were not a shepherd protecting the flock. You were a wolf hiding among them. Let there be no doubt that this behavior will not be tolerated. The gavel fell with a sharp, final crack. Conrad Hargrove was sentenced to a term in a minimum security federal prison. He would lose his pension, his right to own firearms, and any hope of ever working in law enforcement again. As he was led from his courtroom in handcuffs for the last time, his body shook with sobs. His life, as he had known it, was officially over. In a fit of spite, he had tried to destroy a woman's dignity. In return, the system had completely destroyed his. For Amara, the verdict was not a cause for celebration, but for a sober sense of closure. Seeing Hargrove imprisoned did not undo the humiliation or erase the memory of the blow. Justice had been done, but the wound remained. Yet she was determined not to let that wound turn into bitterness. She had seen firsthand how a single act of hatred could uncover a much larger problem, and a new sense of purpose was taking root inside her. She was no longer only the chief's daughter. She was Amara Langston, a brilliant strategist, an exceptional communicator, and now a survivor with a story to tell. She began channeling her experience into concrete action. She started working with a local community support program that sought to strengthen the bond between police and the neighborhoods they served. She used her marketing expertise to help them craft a more powerful message. She began speaking at community meetings, not as a victim recounting her trauma, but as a firm advocate for change. She spoke about accountability, implicit bias, and the urgent need for a police force that reflected and understood the communities it was meant to protect. Her voice, once silenced by an abuser's hand, was now amplified, reaching thousands. She was no longer merely the subject of the story. She was becoming one of its most important authors, helping to write a new chapter for her city. One where justice was not only about punishing the guilty, but about healing the community and building a better, safer future for everyone. The healing had begun, not only for her, but for the entire city. Seasons changed. The scandal of Conrad Hargrove, once a headline on every local newscast, faded from the collective memory, replaced by the endless cycle of urban life. But the changes it had triggered were not temporary. They were real, tangible, and growing. The new anti-bias training initiative that eventually took the name Washington Vans had become a model. Chief Langston's reforms, born from a moment of crisis, were bearing fruit. The department's new duty to intervene policy meant officers were now legally required to stop their colleagues from using excessive force. The corrupt core of Precinct 12 had been replaced by a younger, more diverse command team. The change was slow and imperfect, but undeniable. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, the Crestwood Hills neighborhood held its annual spring festival. The event took place in a local park, the same park where people now jogged every morning. A year earlier, she would have felt like an outsider. Today, she felt like a host. She had joined the organizing committee. Her presence was a quiet but firm declaration. This is my home. I belong here. She walked among the crowd, no longer in the defiant red dress, but in jeans and a t-shirt from the non-profit community organization she now chaired. People greeted her by name. Neighbors who had once eyed her with suspicion now stopped to chat about property taxes and the new coffee shop opening downtown. The attack had somehow broken the ice. It had forced the neighborhood's latent prejudices into the open, and in the aftermath, many residents had been compelled to confront their own biases. It was not a perfect transformation, but it was a beginning. Amara was standing near the food tables when she saw her father approaching. He was in civilian clothes, a simple polo shirt and dress pants, looking more like a relaxed grandfather than the city's police chief. He was smiling, a genuine, warm smile she had not seen enough of in recent months. "Quite the turnout," he said, putting an arm around her. "We did well," she answered, leaning into his embrace. "By the way, the new captain of Precinct 12 is here. He's been greeting people for the past hour." He pointed to a young Latino officer, Captain Rivera, laughing with a group of older residents. He was the man who had replaced Captain Drake, a reformer chosen personally by her father. This was the new face of the department, engaged, accessible, present. "I'm glad to see it," Elias said with quiet pride. As they stood there, a young female officer with a kind face approached. "Excuse me, Miss Langston," she said. "I just wanted to thank you. Last month, I went through the new de-escalation course, the one you recommended. It's made a real difference in how we interact with people. It's better policing." Amara was momentarily surprised. "Thank you, officer. That means a great deal to me." The young officer smiled and nodded respectfully to the chief, then returned to her patrol. It was a brief moment, a simple interaction, but it felt monumental. It was the proof. It was the result of all the pain, the anger, and the struggle. It was a seed of change sprouting under the sun. Later that evening, as the festival wound down and the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Amara found herself alone for a moment, watching families pack up their blankets. She remembered that day in the Gilded Market. She remembered the humiliation, the pain of the slap, the feeling of total isolation. It felt as if a lifetime had passed. The wound had healed. The scar no longer caused pain. It was a reminder of her own strength. She had faced the ugliest form of prejudice, not with fists, but with strategy and determination. She had refused to be only a victim. She had taken a moment of personal affront and turned it into the catalyst for a revolution, however small, in her city. The harsh karma that had fallen on Conrad Hargrove had been swift and devastating, a just and satisfying end to his tyranny. But this feeling of community, this visible evidence of healing, this hope for a better future, this was her victory. It was quieter, deeper, and infinitely more meaningful. The abuser was behind bars. His power was gone. His name was nothing more than a footnote in a cautionary tale. But she was here, in her neighborhood, under the setting sun, free and whole. What do you think of Conrad Hargrove's karma? Was his prison sentence and the complete loss of his career fair, or was it excessive? More importantly, this story shows how one person's courage can trigger systemic change. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wished you could do more than punish one person, and instead fix the corrupt system that enabled them? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments. Your engagement helps us grow and continue sharing stories where arrogance and prejudice meet their ultimate reckoning. If you enjoyed this journey toward justice, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Thank you for watching.